Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom with your host, Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Snippets of Wisdom is the boomer's gift to the next generation and to the world at large. Dr. Michael J. Murphy and Coach Mike Carell are experienced psychotherapists, writers, and healers who find the greatest satisfaction in sharing the benefits of a lifetime of struggle and learning. Coach Mike has spent decades spreading deep wisdom and supporting youth through the juvenile justice system. Dr. Michael has directed mental health services at many correctional centers and testified in countless trials as an expert in sex-related issues and mental illness. And he was one of the 500,000 humans at Woodstock. So now, please welcome the hosts of Snippets of Wisdom.
Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom. I'm Coach Mike Carell, and with me is Dr. Michael Murphy, and together we have an interesting podcast for today. We're going to talk about spiritual intelligence and what it has to do with everyday life. So, man, I'm sure you realize now more than ever, people are struggling, facing emotional, academic, spiritual, financial issues. And a lot of what they're experiencing is so frustrating because it has to do with what's going on around them. And there, there are ways of looking at life that really can help us figure out how to get out of the problems and how to become part of the solution. And one of those things is spiritual intelligence. Over the last 6 years, I did a study on spiritual intelligence as opposed to spirituality. And as it turns out, there are several components to what spiritual intelligence is. And people get confused. They figure, well, because I'm spiritual, I was raised with a religious background, I should be able to do that. But spiritual intelligence is a lot more about how we apply those spiritual experiences that we've had and the advantage that it gives to those who have it. And how you can grow it, how you can actually, increase your spiritual intelligence, much like emotional intelligence. So there are historically, there have been rises in anxiety, depression, burnout, and individuals and institutions are feeling quite overwhelmed trying to provide support. But research reveals that beyond resilience and self efficacy, spiritual intelligence, especially the capacity to create personal meaning, plays a measurable role in how people cope. So I think you know quite a bit about this, Dr. Murphy, because when you break it down, spiritual intelligence explores four key relevant questions. Okay. First of all, what is it? What is spiritual intelligence? How does it connect to emotional resilience? Question number two. What does meaning making matter? How does meaning making matter over everything else? And then what practical steps can communities and organizations take to um, to increase the spiritual intelligence? So, of those four things, Dr. Murphy, what would you say stands out to you the most? And I think I have an idea what you're going to say.
Well, it is. I'm so eager and happy to get into the weeds with regard to this topic, which is a just a fundamental one for all of us in society and as a species. Uh, what is meaning? What is spiritual intelligence? And we're really going to get into the weeds of this today, and we're going to find out a lot of very interesting things. And one of the fundamental things that I have studied, being a philosophy major of long ago, even before I became a psychologist, is the struggle within uh, the philosophical world to understand the difference between what is material and what is spiritual. And we think sometimes that those two domains are mutually exclusive. And that's the problem of what's called dualism. So the problem of dualism from a philosophical perspective is that conflict between what is concrete and what is material, and we just think it's kind of a wooey thing. But in fact, we're discovering, even from a scientific and philosophical perspective now, that they really are the same, that the spiritual and the material domain are both manifestations of this ultimate reality of which we are ourselves a part. And trying to integrate that insight, that deep insight, is a huge phase that humanity is involved in now. Not that there's sort of material things and immaterial things, and we have this material body that eventually it stops working, and then we move on to the next phase, whatever that is. And then there's immaterial things that are so-called spiritual, and they're in a different domain entirely. In fact, that's not the case. That really it's all a continuum and it's all one system of which we are a part. And I think so when we think about spiritual intelligence, we really are thinking about something that's very relevant to our daily lives and our human interactions with all others.
Why do you think people tend to either overlook or ignore or fail to acknowledge the component, that spiritual component, when it's actually one and the same, part of the same continuum as you mentioned? Why do you think it's so hard for people to, I don't know, wrap their head around it, so to speak?
One of the things that I think really affects that is the fact that as human beings, our primary need is for safety. And that seems like a physical thing. So we want to be physically safe. We want to know that we are not going to be harmed. You know, we grow up as little children. We're very vulnerable as babies. And the fundamental need that we have, first and foremost, to learn as um, small children and then young people is how we can maintain a sense of safety and security in our lives. So that need for security seems to predispose us to look at the so-called physical aspect of reality most immediately, first and foremost. Like, how can I be physically safe? When in reality, physical safety and spiritual reality, spiritual safety are in fact really two aspects of the same thing.
Yeah. So what if you could put a gauge on the general population, a safe how safe would you say people feel nowadays, given what's going on in the world, what's going on in our country, the things that we've been through over the past 6 years? How safe would you say, on a scale of 1 to 10, people feel?
That really varies just hugely. I know we were talking before we came on air a little bit about, the periods of war that humanity has experienced over time. We're
Yeah,
going to talk about existentialism later, and that was a period of time when people really felt tremendously unsafe. I mean, they realized that this huge war was going on, millions were dying, seemingly meaninglessly and
yeah. Do you
purposelessly.
think they feel more safe today than they did back
And
then?
I think they feel more safe now, but nonetheless, we're subjected to this media that seems to present us with crises 24/7. So you turn on your phone or whatever, and you're hearing about the crisis of the day. So it seems like there's always something going on. And in fact, there usually is something going on somewhere in the world that poses a risk for us. And the media tends to naturally focus on that, which heightens our sense of anxiety about
Yeah,
safety. Are we secure? Are our families secure? Are our children safe? Are our communities and schools safe? Because we hear about everything. In the past, if something happened on the other side of the planet, we might not even know about it. We probably
right.
wouldn't know about it.
That's
If
right.
something happened in a neighboring area or different state, we wouldn't even know that it occurred. But now we pretty much are informed about every tragedy or dangerous situation that occurs. So that tends to trigger in us a sense of, geez, this world is just not a very safe place because something is happening that is of some concern far away.
Would you say that people are becoming more emotionally resilient than they were before?
I think we face that challenge for sure. I think we are becoming more sensitive and reactive to this anxiety that we hear about constantly through the media. Now we have a conflict that's going on in the world now that, the news certainly quite appropriately is filled with keeping us up to date on what's happening with the most recent
Yeah.
global conflict that we happen to be involved in. And so, that heightens our adrenaline a little bit. We're a little more nervous. We're a little more anxious. Maybe this will somehow affect me. And, somehow it is affecting me. So I think we're more predisposed to anxious reactivity than we have been in a long, long, long time. I mean, maybe going back to the time of the Second World War and times like that where we realized we were in a truly epochal conflict that was
Mhm.
going to determine our future and our destiny. And then we had a period of safety to some extent after the resolution of that war. And now it seems like that once again there is a sense of increased risk. So these skills that we're going to talk about today are even more important, I think, than ever.
So would you say people, you mentioned the word reactive, you think people are more responsive today, or at least learning to be more responsive as opposed to being reactive to what's going on and the things that they're learning?
That's a great point. I think to try to make the transition from reactivity to responsivity
Yeah.
so that you can actually choose to respond. And we're going to talk a lot about that in today's show is how we can choose to respond in ways that are more healthy for us, for our families, for our communities, rather than just being reactive to the current stimulus that happens to be, on um, on the phone in the media at this
Yeah.
time.
You, you know, hearing you say that reminded me of a time when I worked in a juvenile detention center, and we were always doing earthquake drills because we lived in California. So we was always fire drills, earthquake drills on a regular basis. And to be able to get into the institution, you had to go through what they called the key room, and it was uh, doors that locked on both sides so that people that weren't supposed to couldn't get in and out, and that's where you showed your badge and you got your keys to go to the unit that you worked in. So there are about five of us in this tiny little key room, um, and we had an earthquake at that very moment. The five of us trying to get their keys, and people started panicking, right? And so I said, "Remain calm." I said, "Everybody, just remain calm." And this girl, she was in the same training that we had of earthquake training that said remain calm. And she goes, "Forget calm. This is an effing earthquake. I got to get out of here." She's like clawing her way and just pushing people around. And it was a prime example of when are you going to be reactive and when are you going to be responsive? I knew I'm supposed to at least remind people, let's respond to this, not react to this. But there's something in our mind that just kind of uh, causes us to forget what we learned and be reactive. Do you think that is something that can be retrained and formulated so that we are more responsive instead of
I,
reactive?
yeah, I think I have a pretty good example of that, having worked like you in jails and prisons for many decades. And something that would happen with great frequency is that people would come into the prison. They'd be admitted from court. I mean, you go to court, you've been charged with a crime, you're given bail, and so you're transferred to the correctional facility in a police vehicle, and then you come in and suddenly you're admitted, and people oftentimes are not happy about that at all. So they
Right.
start to be reactive. They start to yell. They start to shout. Maybe they're detoxing from substance
You never
dependence. So,
know.
so they're
We'll
not
talk
feeling
about that.
very good.
Let's
Right.
talk about that when we come back. We're going on a commercial break, but I really want to touch on that because that's something everybody should know about.
Great
Um,
thing. Sounds
Come
good.
back. Be with you in a minute.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
And welcome back. Dr. Michael Murphy and myself, Coach Mike, talking about spiritual intelligence. Before we went on break, we're talking about learning how to be responsive as opposed to being reactive to situations around us. And the key thing is that is a good example of what a why spiritual intelligence is required of us, actually. So we're going to take a look at what spiritual intelligence really is. And it's defined as a set of mental capacities that help us integrate transcendent aspects of life, meaning, purpose, values, into everyday problem solving. So it includes critical existential thinking, personal meaning production, transcendental awareness, and conscious state expansion. I remember in the 60s, these were all big deals, big topics. Um, People were into transcendental meditation. They were into expanding your consciousness. A lot of these things. World War One, where personal meaning production was a big deal. Viktor Frankl was a prime example of that, right? And critical existential thinking. That's another thing. So let's talk about how that all comes together and what you were saying about being responsive as opposed to being reactive. How does this help us? How could spiritual intelligence help us to do that?
One of the great examples of that, I think, that I've experienced over the course of my career working in jails and prisons is when someone enters into the correctional environment. They may not have been there before. They find themselves transported from the outside world into a jail or prison where they're restrained and their freedom is severely restricted, and they start to become very upset and angry, resentful, psychologically and emotionally reactive. In other words, they start to throw a tantrum. And that starts to become a problem. And those are situations in which I dealt with them on many, many, many hundreds of occasions. And I would watch the transformation occur as they slowly adjusted to this new environment, where they really were called upon to engage in a spiritual transformation, if you will, on the deepest level, because they were there in this environment that they didn't want to be in. They are going to have to remain there for a period of time over which they had no choice. And they had to literally make a decision. They had to choose to engage in a transformation or not. And for a period of time, they may resist that transformation, but ultimately they realized that they needed to make the best of it. And with almost without exception, everybody did make that transformation, that spiritual transformation to finding meaning even within the correctional environment. I mean, what can I do? I can have associations with other inmates. I can choose to participate in rehabilitative training and classes. I can choose to take some enjoyment in my access to canteen. I can choose to uh, find meaning in my visits with, my significant others who may come to the visiting area. I mean, there are various small enjoyments that they learned to see as being very important and as having great significance for them that allowed them to make this transformation, this spiritual transformation to understanding uh, that they were in charge of what their lives would be and how their lives would be. And these people would approach me later, I'd meet with them, and they'd say to me, hey, Doc, coming to this jail is the best thing that ever happened in my life. And literally, that is a phrase that I heard hundreds of times. And that's no exaggeration. They would come in and say, listen, coming here is the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And you'd ask why, and they say, well, they're back. They feel like they're in charge. They're clean and sober again. They have a sense of direction and purpose in their lives. So they're making meaning. This is really the exact topic that we're talking about here today. And that was an example that I'm sure you experienced many times as well
Oh, yeah.
in your career.
Yeah. It's ironic because you would think that uh, it would be something else that motivated them to get out of the prison situation or being incarcerated. But ironically, having lost so much freedom and so many things that they had taken for granted, losing it all. Uh, After the acquiescence, after you finally give into it, okay, I guess there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to be here for however long time. And then they begin to notice the things that they look forward to in that setting. And the appreciation comes back. That attitude of gratitude gradually begins to come back. Wow, I can't wait till Friday. Friday is when we have chili mac night or whatever is on the menu, or visiting days where I get to see all these things that were available to you when you were free, but you didn't appreciate.
Right,
You know,
right.
maybe you were ungrateful because you didn't have the right money, or you didn't have the status, you didn't have, you didn't belong to the right group of people, whatever it was. Losing sight of what's good in your life because you're focused on what was not.
Yeah, there's two things about what you just said that I think are just really, really, really so important. And one is, as you mentioned, the attitude of gratitude, having an attitude where you notice whatever positive things are available to you, like maybe there's a particularly good meal today, or maybe you have a visitor today. And the other part I think you mentioned is having to having to go through that dark night of the soul in
Yeah.
the process of the spiritual transformation. That spiritual intelligence really is that capacity that allows us to go through the dark night of the soul, where you realize, hey, I can't get out of here. I'm not going to be able to just snap my fingers and have this be all better. It's not going to be all better. I'm going to have to adapt. I'm going to have to learn. I'm going to have to change. I'm going to have to become, in some sense, a different person, a better person somehow. I'm going to have to grow. And so that when you realize that, only at the time that you realize that you have lost something essential that you thought you would never lose, is when that transformation occurs. And it's kind of required that you have to have that dark night of the soul before you're able to engage in that transformation, which involves this whole sense of growth. And then later being able to make that statement and saying, hey, listen, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. the opportunity to grow spiritually and become more powerful.
For sure. I remember you and I had a conversation about addiction and what it takes for somebody to actually come out of uh, uh, those terrible circumstances. And you said, yeah, they have to hit rock bottom before they can
Yeah.
actually come out. It's kind of like rising out of the ashes, like the phoenix. It has to. You have to lose it all. You have to get to the very bottom before you can begin to appreciate the simple things. You know, um, like you said, that come out of that darkness.
That's a great insight and really hitting, they have a statement in almost all recovery programs, where's your bottom? Have you hit bottom yet? I mean, and so you realize that the person isn't really going to recover and start their true recovery process, their true growth until they've hit bottom. So all of us can examine our lives. Like think about your own lives. All the listeners out there can think about their own lives and think, where was my bottom? I mean, have I hit bottom in my life at some point where I realized I really needed to do some things differently? I needed to open up in some way. I needed to learn new skills and go through a process of adaptation in order to rise up again, to be resurrected, if you will. And that's sort of the whole spiritual, very deep spiritual um, topic. It's hard to even find words to describe it, of resurrection and how we can
Yeah,
become resurrected
yeah.
from a sense of loss, a sense of deprivation, and be resurrected anew as really a new human being. And that process of transformation is the deep process we're talking about here today.
It sounds like you're describing some of those two components. One of them being transcendental awareness, the ability to rise above or transcend your exact circumstances, even though you have to learn from them. Okay, I am at rock bottom right now. What can I look around? What can I learn from being here? I'm at rock bottom. What does rock bottom have for me? What can I learn from being here? Which allows you to actually transcend the attitude. Well, I don't belong here. I got to get out. Yada yada yada. But
Mhm.
acquiescing and saying, okay, even though I don't want to be here, I can benefit from being here somehow, some way, and that triggers an expansion of your awareness, that constant state expansion, that is another component of spiritual intelligence. So you expand your consciousness to a point where it's not just what you thought, but there's more to it, you know to examine. Like there is something good about being at rock bottom, being in this terrible place, if you will.
That's such a deep insight, I think, that sense of needing to hit the bottom and needing to, and only then can resurrection occur. I mean, true resurrection and a remaking of yourself, that people are able to come to the point only because we are human beings. It's something that's unique about our humanity that we have the capacity to resurrect in this way, to reform ourselves in new situations so that we can adapt. I mean, all living beings really have the capacity for adaptation, right? I mean, if you find yourself in a new environment that's different, with different challenges, as people did using the prison analogy that we're using here today, is really, our capacity to transform and grow and regenerate ourselves is really something that is, the deepest form of spiritual intelligence
Oh
that you're
yeah,
talking today.
100% agree with that one. We want to talk about the pathway that is created um, with meaning making and resilience and well-being ultimately, and we'll talk about that when we come back. So don't go away, stay with us, and we'll be back soon.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Okay, welcome back. So we're talking about the purpose of meaning making in our life. Why is it so important to have meaning and make a meaning of our situation, no matter how bad it is? And as it turns out that meaning making fosters resilience. It allows us to become more resilient, which in turn allows us to get better, it improves our general well-being. So it's kind of like a sequence for everyone. Meaning making leads to emotional resilience, which in turn fosters general well-being. And so those who actually learn how to make meaning of their situation are more likely to bounce back from adversity and then quickly maintain their well-being, improve their sense of well-being or their state of well-being. So resilience doesn't necessarily predict our ability to achieve anything, but it does allow us to manage our situation and grow the meaning behind whatever it is that we're doing. You were talking about people's ability to bounce back after tremendous loss. We're talking about parents who've lost children. What are your thoughts on how it must be? Personally, I have not had that kind of loss. Um, but I can only imagine what it's like to lose somebody and make meaning of that. How do you do that?
You know, it's interesting. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche made the statement, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." And it
Yeah,
sort of has become a famous saying that a lot of people have quoted
Terminator
over
made
the
that.
over the years and years. And that which does not kill me makes me stronger. And it's something that comes up when one suffers what seems to be an overwhelming loss that just cannot be comprehended, and it seems just not in the natural order of things for a parent, for example, to lose a child before they themselves pass on. It just seems like it's not in the natural order of things, and trying to find meaning in that situation is really fundamental to our humanity. It's something that human beings can do, go through the process of grieving. And what is the grieving process but going through a period of sadness and despondency uh, that represents the internalization of the reality of the loss over time. And then finally, coming to the point where one finds meaning even in that terrible situation. Many people find a sense of purpose thereon. If the circumstances that led to their loss of the child, then they create an institution or some kind of enterprise that will help to keep that particular negative event from happening to others. And that gives them meaning in their lives. And they realize that their purpose then is to move on and contribute to the world in ways that will reduce the probability of such a terrible thing happening to others. And that thereby is a meaning making process for
Yeah.
them. And so that allows them to feel a sense of purpose, that allows them to carry on and leave their grief behind to some degree and realize that they're going on with a new life, but it is a life. They still have a life to live, even in the context of the loss of the loved one. So I think, it just represents the resiliency that you were talking about of the human spirit. The amazing resiliency of the capacity to human beings to deal with uh, even the very most devastating losses that may confront them over the course of a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, you know, we can't imagine how something so devastating could uh, provide such a benefit. When you try to put the word benefit and the tragedy together, they almost don't fit. Ironically, though, when we have that kind of an experience, let's say it's a debilitating illness, cancer, or the death of somebody who had a disability, it raises our awareness to a point where, okay, now that we know this is what happens to people in that situation, let's create a foundation to raise the awareness so that other people don't have to suffer as much as we do. There are countless foundations nowadays that contribute to the research of those kinds of things. Eric Clapton's example, we talked about that, you and I, Dr. Murphy, how he bounced back from that terrible loss. He actually created a foundation for his son. I think it was called the Connor Foundation or something to that effect. But there are countless stories like that where people actually gave meaning to the loss. They gave meaning to the adversity that they experienced in their life.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a wonderful captain in one of the institutions that I worked in, uh, one of the prisons, and she was the first lieutenant, the first female lieutenant, the first female captain, and she was in charge of the female unit at the institution. And she had a saying that she would share with the usually young ladies who were incarcerated there. And she would say, "How are we going to make some lemonade out of these lemons?" And that really kind of captures it. You're in this situation, you're here locked up in the women's unit at this jail, and how are you going to make some lemonade, some lemonade, excuse me, out of these lemons where you are? And they would. She was just a wonderful leader and wonderful in helping them to understand that they can resurrect themselves and use that period of incarceration as an opportunity to resurrect themselves and create themselves anew so that they can be a better and stronger person when they get released. So yeah, it's a great analogy.
I think it reminds me of the ability to see hope. The fact life deals you lemons doesn't take away the hope. It actually gives you a different kind of hope. Well, if you have lemons, it's bittersweet, but there is something that lemons have a purpose for. So that whole idea of having that hope that kind of fosters the vision that you're not going to be in this situation forever. You're going to improve the situation, ironically or otherwise, and actually give purpose to your existence now, to what you're going through right now. So when people like that captain are able to change a person's perspective, if you will, and reframe the situation so that they actually begin to look at the exact same situation but with a different perspective, giving it potential, giving it hope, if you will. And Viktor Frankl talked about uh, inmates and the resilience, those that had the ability, that had hope in engaging with people that shared um, the same values, that shared the same dreams. When you connect with people and share hope in that way, it gives your situation new meaning and actually provides that hope. It's like hope of hope, kind of a meta hope that there's hope, if not hope itself. And there are people who will say, you know what, I don't want to get my hopes up, so I'm not going to even try to imagine how good it could be. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we can make, is to assume that it couldn't be any better. But hope maketh not ashamed. That's a scripture in the Bible. Hope never disappoints. You have hope something will be better, it will be better. You know. What
That's
do you
a
think?
great insight, I think, in that whole, I mean, the challenge to dare to hope. I mean, to dare to have hope, to risk
It's
hope.
risky.
I mean,
Yeah.
and certainly, Viktor Frankl's great book, Man's Search for Meaning, really represents that, in the sense that he was in the most hopeless of situations,
Yeah.
locked in a concentration camp where thousands were dying all the time, and yet he found a way to make his life meaningful, primarily through service to others. He would share a piece of his blanket with someone else. He'd share a crust of bread. He'd give something to his fellow inmates, and that actually helped him to survive the terrible travail of that situation and the brutality of that situation, such that
Yeah.
one day, the American army was advancing, and they all got up and they found that the gates were open and they had survived. And he then was able to go on with his life and share the great meaning and insights that he was able to share, solely because he dared to have hope, and he dared to risk that he was able, through his own service, to
Yeah.
survive. And so that choice, the human choice to be able to risk hope, even in the most extreme situations, is something of which we uniquely are capable as human beings.
For
And it's
sure.
a conscious choice. You talked earlier about um, the issue of transcendence, and transcendental meditation is an example of
Mhm.
practicing that skill. What is meditation but choosing to focus on something positive, or even something neutral, in the
That's
context of strife, that allows you to calm down, organize your thoughts and feelings, realize you're going to make it to another day. And those are the benefits of meditation, which really is a form of the emotional intelligence that you're talking about
yeah.
here today.
That whole situation, Dr. Frankel's situation, is what led him to create logotherapy. Logotherapy, when you take the word the word logo means
Hmm.
meaning,
Right.
means meaning. And so, even advertising, everybody's got to have a logo, right?
Right.
When you see the Pepsi logo, or any kind of logo, that's what it means. That's what your work means, your product, your service. It means that. And logotherapy helped people to create meaning in their life, which I think is a wonderful accomplishment. I think if we did nothing else in our life, um, if we could trade our complaints for meaning making, I think we'd be a lot better off individually and as a community, as a global community as well. Um, because we would refuse to complain, because it takes up the place of creating hope and creating a new situation, for ourselves. I mean,
Yeah, one of the
what?
things that I think we face now is, some opportunities to really use that hope and focus on the positive things that are going to happen in the near future with
Yeah,
regard to technology. We talked about this in one of our previous podcasts, that
yep,
that's going to offer us the opportunity to have um, well, caring
Yeah,
and sharing in ways that really works for all of humanity. And to
for sure.
choose to believe in that
Yeah.
is, the choice that we face now, and then to employ all those opportunities and share them with the whole world.
When we come back, we'll talk more about how to do that, how to make that meaning, how to make those choices for ourselves that are going to make the biggest difference. So don't go away.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
And welcome back, everybody. So, if you have enjoyed the podcast this week and in the past weeks, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channels. We each have our own channel, so go ahead, take a look at that, like and subscribe, and you'll get more. So, we've been talking about making meaning in our lives, making meaning out of even the most difficult situations, and how it can contribute to our general well-being, not just for us, but it can also improve our influence over the rest of the world. Beginning with our own little circle, our family, our friends, and then the community at large, and hopefully it'll have a global impact too. But the big question is, what are we going to do about that? How can we implement that? How can we apply it in our daily life? And Dr. Murphy, you are very, very familiar with these kinds of things, like integrating meaning into our lives through reflection groups and workshops and things like that. Tell us a little bit more about some of the things that can be done.
Yeah, when you think about the history of philosophy and how the human race has chosen to make meaning throughout the hundreds of thousands of years of our existence, it really is that fundamental thing. I mean, how we can choose to um, to actualize that aspects of ourselves, our brain, that can function in the expression of spiritual intelligence that we're talking about today, and that we're understanding now um, is not really any different than any other skill that we have. So, for example, something that we can do in order to develop our own spiritual intelligence is having a spiritual practice. So I think it's really important for all of us to, the first thing we do when we wake up in the morning is to engage in a series of behaviors, carve out some time, whether it's half an hour or 45 minutes or an hour. Some people even do a couple of hours in the morning that includes some kind of movement. Perhaps it's yoga, perhaps it's some kind of exercise that allows you to sort of wake up your body and allow your neuroanatomy to start to be in motion again. Then also do some form of meditation,
Yeah.
not medication. I like to say not medication,
Yeah.
meditation.
I
And
meditate.
meditation is you focus on some kind of concept or some kind of image, whether it's counting from 1 to 10 or looking at a candle or saying a mantra that is your personal mantra, which you can make up for yourself, and then focusing on that as best you can, and also doing breath work. Breath
Yes.
work is something that's become very popular lately. So many people are coming to understand that we as human beings really have not done a very good job of, of taking care of this
Right.
very basic skill of how we breathe and learning how to breathe in a way that contributes to our health, our well-being, our alertness. And so when you carve out that time in the morning for a morning practice,
So
then
you're
that
talking
allows you to begin the day
routine is a
successful.
practice, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I I think that's a perfect way to actually even begin the day. It's like after a while it becomes a natural order for you to do. You get up in the morning. I know for myself, I don't even get out of the bed without acknowledging, without giving myself over to God and allowing God to be a part of every decision that I make. I breathe. I breathe in the morning. I do some box breathing, and as I'm getting out of the bed, I'm in that state of mind that allows us to know we're not alone, to know that there's a governing and supportive force beyond us. And then throughout the day I just get to a place where I do what I call the theta, you know brain waves, where I just allow my mind to be and to exist with gratitude for just about everything that's working in my life. And there are so many variations of that. um, uh, you mentioned breath work. There's a way of breathing through the nose that allows the nitric
Mhm.
oxide in our to go to our brain, which kind of opens everything up for us. It allows us to actually see things a little bit more clearly, if you will, and a whole number of other things that we can do that actually make you feel confidence as you go through them. It builds your confidence as you go through your routine or your practice. In the morning. That's a excellent thing. I don't know how many people actually do those things, but it kind of gives for me, it gives me a sense of control, knowing that I'm not out there willy nilly, but I do have some say in how my day is going to go. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So you're empowering yourself. I mean, the first thing you're doing in the morning is that you're saying to yourself, I'm in charge of this day. I'm in charge of how I'm going to handle this day. And so you start your day with that mentality. And once you empower yourself, then you certainly can accomplish a lot more, I think. And you mentioned, nasal breathing. It's one of those little things that many of us don't think about, but uh, we breathe through our mouth. We're wired neuroanatomically to breathe through our mouth only when we're in a situation of crisis. Like, so we breathe that way only when we need to be running away from a wild animal or something like that. We're in
Right.
urgent. Yeah, so mouth breathing is correlated with anxiety. So if you train yourself to breathe through your nose, and you can
Yes.
do that through various exercises that you can look up and do all kinds of nasal cleansing and practice
Yep.
nasal breathing, you find that that in itself is calming. That's a spiritual practice
Yeah.
that you can endeavor to integrate into your daily life that allows you to be more calm. And
Beautiful.
so, it's something, just try it, you know, cleanse your nasal passages and then do nasal breathing, and you'll find that that is associated with greater focus and calmness.
So if we
And
had 30 seconds left, Dr. Murphy, what would you say to everybody in the last 30 seconds of our show?
if I had one thing to say, I'd say do a morning practice. I mean, just make
Beautiful.
sure that you get up in the morning, you put some time together, and you do that, and you will not regret it. I guarantee it. It will make your life richer and stronger and more loving for everyone.
Love it. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure working with you, Dr. Murphy, and I hope that people get to realize how empowering it is to have someone in your life that you can share hope with, to make meaning with, and go through life with. I want to thank you, all of you, for being with us today. We hope you come back with us next week and share some more. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you
Murphy.
so much.
This has been Snippets of Wisdom with hosts Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Tune in and learn about the primary issues facing our society today and find the best chance of securing a stable and prosperous future. Snippets of Wisdom will enrich your life and the lives of all of your loved ones.